Hi, Chocolako. How are you? It's so good to see you. You're looking amazing. How are you? You look great.
Thank you. And so do you. I love the colors. You're always so vibrant.
Oh, thank you. So, welcome to Truth, Wisdom, Freedom Conversations. And in this episode, we have here Chocolako, and we are talking about healing the way forward through oppressive marginalization, rejection, and hate. And this is a conversation that, is very, very much close to our hearts. We have been talking about this earlier this week, and it's for sure everything that's been unfolding in America has been really asking us to look inwards and to look at what's happening. How do we step up as an inner leader? All of this trauma that's happening, not just in America, but around the world. And you were talking a little bit about that. And so I'd love to hear from you, what you've been going through. I'm here in Sydney, Australia. I'm not feeling it as much because I'm not in the muck, but you're in Atlanta, Georgia, in America. And so what's going on for you right now?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for reaching out last week to ask about my health and well-being and to check in. I really appreciated the consideration. So thank you for that. And that conversation led to this conversation that we're having right now. And so I think it's very important that we're reaching out to our peers, our friends, our loved ones around the world to just truly check in. So I just want to say thank you from my heart to yours for doing so. Because right now I'm just feeling everything from this space, and I'm recognizing the varying degrees of sensitivity around what's happening around the world. I mean, these are very disheartening times. I think whether we are directly involved by being on the front line or in hospitals or different healthcare facilities around the world, I mean, we are all feeling very heavy. I think it's impossible, unless you're hiding under a rock, to avoid the shift in atmosphere on a global scale. I think the last time we may have felt this level of shock to the global system was around 9/11, and that was still seemingly, a US focused situation. And so, to your question, it's interesting for me because I left the US about 10 years ago to start studying in London. And so it has taken me 10 years to return back to the US. I've been traveling through studying my yogic philosophies, teaching, leading, facilitating teacher trainings and workshops around the world. And so a friend asked me recently, do you think you'd feel the way you're feeling if you were outside of America? And I had to journal that prompt and really dig deep within myself to say, okay, these feelings that are surfacing, and by feelings, I'm referring to the sensations of familiarity, because these episodes are reminding me of times when I've experienced personally racism or humiliation by virtue of the color of my skin, which is something I quite frankly can't control.
Right.
And so what's happening is these stories are compounded and they're dredging up wounds that have not been resolved or considered for a very, very long time. And so that's the collective uproar that we're hearing right now. It's that, we've been silenced for so long, despite what we have, thought to be effective communication, we're not being heard. And by we, I'm referring to those who feel as though they are constantly on edge by their surrounding environment. And it's a concerning feeling to constantly repress, pain and just experiences. And we are now seeing the result of that, of being silenced for so long. And because what's essentially happening is we're recognizing that hurt people hurt people. Yeah. And so deep within ourselves, we are simply expressing what's happening on the inside. This internal war is what's now being expressed outward, and we're feeling it. We're really feeling it. And so what I'm most interested in is how can we restore in between these shocks to the system, because they're compounding.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I was just speaking to someone yesterday in LA who was telling me about how he's been seeing and experiencing, he has personal friends and people that he knows with small businesses being burned, houses being burned, people having to go back to stay with their parents in different states because people don't feel safe. And yes, people have every right to feel angry and to feel that pain, because that's your pain, and we have no right to take away anyone else's pain, right? However, it brings up the question, well, what do we do with this pain? How do we channel this in a way that is productive, that is healing, not just for ourselves, but for the community at large? And before we got on this talk, I was listening to Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is a doctor, and she gave a brilliant TED Talk about trauma, especially childhood trauma, and how that affects public health in directly, and that children of color and minority people, especially people who feel marginalized or ostracized, and this is a study done in America with the Adverse Childhood Experiment study that surveyed over 17,500 adults, and they talked about the physical, mental abuse of harboring that trauma and what that does to the brain. There are neurological changes that happen to the brain where it inhibits the growth of the prefrontal cortex as a child growing up. And I think, I definitely have experienced racism growing up in New York City. You have, for sure, right? Growing up in the States as well. And so racism for me hits home because, as a kid, I used to hate myself. I used to hate being Asian. I used to think that being white would have made my life much easier. And then being straight too, I used to hate also being gay, right? And so there were all these layers of self-hate, self-rejection, self-marginalization, self-oppression. And all of these things, really built up in such a way that I became a very anxious young adult. I became I was very much the lone wolf. And now if I didn't find yoga, and if I didn't find meditation and find an alternative way to release all this pent up hurt inside and heal those wounds, and still, healing layers and layers of these wounds still to this day, right? I don't know where I would be. And then one of the things that, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris was talking about was the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Adrenal Axis, which is the HPA axis. And when we are in a state of fight or flight, what happens is, the hypothalamus and the brain sends a signal to the pituitary, it sends a signal to the adrenal system, and then there's this triangle of hormones, of stress hormones being pumped into the body to get ready to fight. And if we are under duress and trauma and experiencing trauma in the moment every day, especially if you feel ostracized as a kid, you're feeling that every single day. And so that system in your biology that's supposed to be adaptive becomes maladaptive, and it affects your entire immune system. It affects your brain, right? The research was showing that you're 2.5 times more likely to develop pulmonary heart issues, cancers, 4 times more likely to become depressed, and 12 times more likely to commit suicide. And that is frightening. It's no longer a social, mental health thing that you can just segment away. It's a holistic approach. We have to look at the trauma as we're experiencing it in the moment and to move through it.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing in the scientific publication. I personally want to read this article. I mean, to read more from this author that you just mentioned. It reminds me of why I appreciate yin yoga so much. Because what tends to happen is, as you're describing the trifecta that's happening through the endocrine system within the body, there's very little space to regulate the nervous system, to nourish on a cellular level and calm down. And so we're constantly operating from this heightened state of awareness and activity without balancing out and nourishing during those periods of rest and digest. Let me absorb all that I received, integrate it, and then when I'm restored, go back into the playing field. I think to your point, and what I was saying earlier about what yin yoga does for me personally is it allows me to rest for about 3 to 5 minutes and feel all the sensations that want to naturally unravel, unwind, and reveal what has been held on to for so long, and let go. Because instead of holding on to that trapped energy in the body, allowing it to run out its full life course, its full life cycle, I think that's the part that keeps me coming back to practices and some of my resources that I know are effective for me, and that's been part of my discovery journey, is like, what works for me. I need to be able to access them and pull them on a moment's notice, because I have no clue what's coming at me. I just don't know. And so how can I continue to prepare, and as I'm preparing, also nourish myself? Like, take it easy, we're still in the body, it's going to be okay. And I think the article and the author that you just mentioned made some very valid points.
Yeah.
And the connection is that.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding us to tune into that which is not okay, and feeling the permission to allow what is not okay to be felt. And I think that's really the first step, is to feel the not okayness of everything. So what do we do from there? What else have you been doing to move through that barrier, that first that wall that comes up that goes, oh my God, there's so much happening. I know, you have a huge community of people looking to you as a role model and reaching out to you specifically. Choc, what do I do during these times? Help. So what would you say to those people?
Wow, as you just said that, I just thought about a couple of conversations I had earlier today that were quite heavy on the heart. You're right. A number of people have reached out on Instagram and email to just say, hey, I'm sorry this is happening. How are you feeling? How is your heart? How can I help? And those questions are obviously appreciated.
It's 9 o'clock.
Appreciated and welcome. When I do receive these moments where people are feeling frantic or destabilized, I ask that we just come to a comfortable position, whether that's standing or seated, and I just say, hey, put your hand over your heart. Just feel that. Notice the intensity of your beating heart, and see if you can calm that down. So essentially bringing people back to the body. Because what tends to happen is, as we are dredging up old stories, especially race-based traumatic situations, we tend to disembody. We want to run away from the pain, from the emotions, from the experiences that we've tried to suppress for so long. But then my invitation has always been, and my encouragement is, to stay in the body and ride it out. Notice how you're feeling around it. And then spend as much time in nature as possible. I mean, the frequency of earth energy is so nourishing, and it's stable. Just like really paying attention to other live entities on the planet and how it is they're operating. And then once you finally come to a place where you have regulated your nervous system and you calm down, looking from a very broad perspective in terms of solutions. It's very obvious that there's a problem. Yeah. It's just, you have to be under a rock to not know that there is a problem globally. And sure. So we all have that level of awareness, and we all have that understanding. And so now that we are seemingly on the same playing field and on the same chapter, we can begin to have conversations about strategizing in a harmonious way. I think about ahimsa, and I going through my yamas and niyamas and really bringing in tools that I know to be proven, tried and tested. And I just firmly believe that we're going to get to a place where we're now having more encouraging conversations about this.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about ahimsa, nonviolence, which is the Sanskrit for nonviolence, and that was something that Gandhi, practiced a lot. And as you're talking about nonviolence and ahimsa, I'm thinking about not just nonviolent thoughts and emotions towards ourselves, but also to others, to our quote unquote enemy, right?
Yeah, well, to those who just don't understand, because I think what's baffling to me and so many other people on the planet is there are honestly some people on this planet who don't know there's a problem. You know, I'm seeing the comments on my page and my inbox and on other people's Instagram, social media platforms. And there are honestly some people who did not know the extent to the pain that their fellow human beings are and have been experiencing for years. You know, I do believe we're at a very interesting intersection. You know, we're just coming off the back of 400 years post-slavery. You know, 2020 meaning clarity in terms of vision and what's really here and now and present. We have pandemic globally, so there's so many variables intersecting simultaneously. So energetically, in the unseen realm, obviously there's major activity going on, and what we're experiencing is just the manifestation of that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The manifestation of that. And again, hurt people. And my trust, hope, and belief is that we start to recognize that we're really doing a disservice to ourselves and each other by allowing these episodes to continue.
Yeah. Yeah.
These imprints are very painful, and I'm just trusting and believing that now that we've all felt it and we know it doesn't feel good on any level, that now we can work together to do something about it, so we don't have to experience this level, this imprint again, not to this degree. You know, it's not to this degree.
Yeah. Yeah, we're having some comments here as people are watching, and Annalise is saying, you know, firstly we weep and then we hum and then we're back to the body. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that, Annalise. And it really is that we have to allow ourselves to grieve and to feel into what it is that's happening. And the first thing is awareness that, you know, our fellow humans, whether you're in America or not in America, that affects us no matter where you are. It's the chaos theory. It's the butterfly effect, where, you know, the flap of a butterfly's wings has been mathematically shown, you know, to create a tornado somewhere in Texas, right? And that butterfly could be flapping its wings in France, right? And that every little drop, every choice, every event, no matter how small that we perceive it to be, has an effect on the greater whole. And that's something that we have to understand. We're completely interconnected to one another. And so as a leader, as a conscious leader, as a parent, as a teacher, as an educator, as a government official, you know, we're all being asked to step up as an with our inner leader, and to be there as a lighthouse for people who are needing reminders about, like what you were talking about with nonviolence, right? Because that's not the answer. That's just an expression of the hurt.
And also, I totally agree. And also just recognizing the sacredness of rage and how best we can utilize that resource, that energy, for a greater return on our investment, because our energy essentially is a resource like time that we may not, you know, that we can't get back.
So how do we use something like anger and rage, and how do we repurpose it and redirect it into something that's healthier and more productive?
Yeah. I think that is the infinite question that we are all just kind of sitting here like, okay, like, what is it? Like, how do we do this? How do we get to the next phase where we're all in agreement that this feels much better? And it will take conversations with the stakeholders you've mentioned, plus healers and many others who you didn't mention, totally government officials, the police force, fire department, educators. You know, we need leaders from all stakeholder groups to really engage and work together to come up with a plan based on their silo, and we all present together and say, okay, we believe these are the ways forward, and then we put in tactics, we execute on tactics that we believe will yield a greater return for us. I think there's going to need to be some very uncomfortable conversations,
sure,
in order for the next phase to even begin, because as I mentioned earlier, there genuinely are people on the planet who never knew that the problem was as deep as it has been.
And I think there definitely needs to be, almost like in Aikido, in martial arts, where, you know, you have a aggressor, you have someone coming at you, and it's the first instinct is to fight back, is to, go into this warrior mode. And, the whole practice of ahimsa and of nonviolence is to engage in a conversation that is healthy, right? So that we can understand and empathize, my hurt part to your hurt part. Let's figure out how we can move forward, because all of this fighting is not going to help. And it reminds me of a story about Gandhi during the salt protests in India, when they were looking for, like independence. And the government, of course, in India at that time was very upset that, here are these people doing this peaceful protest. And so they needed to do something. So the Indian government threatened Gandhi with arrest. So they sent a army official out to go deal with him. And so Gandhi's followers heard about this, and they said to Gandhi, well, should we go and stop the flow and throw nails in the road and pop their tires so they can't get here? And Gandhi said, no, we will not do such a thing. What are we going to do? Says his followers. And Gandhi said, we're going to invite them over for tea. And so he brings them over and they have tea. And this is their enemy, right? This is who they're fighting against. And he invites them for tea, and they keep offering them tea and offering them biscuits. And at the end of that meeting, this army officer that was sent to threaten him becomes an ally. And this is not an intuitive thing to do. We're not wired this way biologically. We have, the reptilian part of our brain goes run, or fight, and we go into our animal nature. But we're so much more than that now, right? And we know that this doesn't work anymore.
Are we?
Are we more than our animal nature? We're so much. We're multidimensional, right? Yes, we are animal, right? But there's as we evolve as the species together, we realize that the higher operating forces of love and compassion really that's key. That's key in how we deal with people. Otherwise, we just go back to the caveman days and, be all feral.
Now it's being so did you finish the story?
That's the story. It's about feeding your so-called enemy, your these demons that are coming at you, with love and compassion.
Yeah. So basically disarming them with compassion and love and respect. I get that. Yeah. And it's also beneficial if it's met with that same frequency or a similar frequency, and that's where the dialogue is much more effective. I agree. I think what's very incredible is that the entire world is in unison in this regard. This is not right, and yes, something should be done. I think that is an amazing first step. Amazing. The realism and the awareness of it, and taking ownership and accepting it, and then we can, have the discussions about a healing way forward.
Yeah, we have a sharing here.
This is my first time in America in the last 10 years for this long. My plan was to, I was here for the holiday. I'm off to Peru in February. Then I'm flying to Morocco March, then Bali April, and then all of my travel plans, my retreats and teacher trainings for the year have been postponed. And so being here right now and feeling all of this, I'm like, you know what? I'm with my family. I'm at a unique vantage point because there are peaceful protests happening here in Atlanta, in the city I grew up in, and I'm very, very, very grateful for the chance to be here with my family because this has been the best way to nourish for me. I can't imagine how I would be if I were out traveling anywhere else in the world.
For sure.
Cuddling your family tight is so important right now.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. We have a comment here in the live about rage. So Annalise is saying that she doesn't think that we can repurpose rage. She's lived with anger around the wound of dislocation for so long. It's For her, it's about grief and listening to that grief from love that will pivot this situation. There is no enemy, we are one. It's a cliche because it's true. So what do you think about that, about repurposing rage, and addressing that a little bit, especially because there's so much of it happening right now in America?
First off, Annalise, thank you so much for that comment. I really appreciate it. To your point about repurposing, I actually would encourage you to expand your perspective on what rage truly is. It's an energetic force, and it just so happens that we feel it within our body, right? And so we can become familiar with it to a point that once we have an intimate relationship with it, we can direct it. Because what tends to happen is these emotions feel overwhelming, and the aim is to be the master of these energies in motion, so that over time you have built up the resilience, the inner knowing that this moment will pass, this experience will pass. So you don't have to expend your energy on each and everything that has yielded the energy of rage. You know that you can preserve your energy so that you can utilize it for something that's beneficial. I do believe that rage has its place. For example, what's happening right now with peaceful protest around the world and violent protest around the world, I firmly believe that it has its place in the grand scheme of infinity. And so it too wants to run out its full, life cycle, its course, and it doesn't last forever. The reason why I believe it can be repurposed is because of the artists that we know who have provided works of art around the world, and we sit there and we're in awe that we believe it's majestic, it's incredible, it inspires us. So it has a far greater range within its frequency for positive or not so positive, that we can begin to experience ways to use rage effectively. And it comes with practice, but before we even start practicing, it starts with the intention to want to do something constructive with rage. And so I believe, again, it has its place. I don't think we should hold on to it. I think it, like everything else, it's impermanent. It's impermanent.
Yeah, thanks so
I
much.
just want to encourage Annalise to let go, like allow yourself space so that you can begin to cultivate and navigate in a way that is more beneficial for you. Like become more supple, dissolve, start to soften into the experience, and recognize that you can use the energy in a very beautiful and harmonious way.
Yeah, it's a beautiful reminder we need to zoom out and know that we don't know what the greater picture really is. Like, there's no way we as feeble human beings can comprehend the point of something. And we typically can in retrospect. When we look back 100 years in history, we go, oh, right. But in the moment when we're going through the thick of it, it's hard to understand it. And maybe it's not for us to understand in that way through the intellect. And one of my teachers, he says something really lovely about the body and the mind. He says the body is like an analog system. It's a dial-up modem, and so it's taking time to process. We process our emotions through it, and the mind is digital. It's quite quick. It's like everything's instant. And so our intellect is really, really quick, and it's quick to want to grasp an understanding of what is happening in the system. However, a storm that's brewing, it might take 5 days, 2 weeks to pass. You have to let the analog system do its thing. We can't rush, Hurricane Irene out of there. Hurricane Irene's going to do its thing, right? El Nino is going to do its thing. And what we can do is choose the relationship we have to the storm. Do we want to go into the eye of the storm? Do we want to start running away from the storm? Do we want to try and fight the storm? The storm's a storm. Right. And unfortunately, yes, it is manifesting in a lot of hate and bigotry and violence all around the world. You were even talking about issues happening in Nigeria earlier that were really hitting close to home, and people don't even know what's happening there. And so it's not just, a racial thing in America. What COVID's brought out in everyone is their inner demons, the inner virus that is that is that's based in fear, really. Like, I fear you because you're different. I fear the structure. It's just fear all around. And we need to choose wisely how we relate to that fear, and how we can transmute it into, what you were saying about, art is one way, expressing yourself verbally, or dancing or breathing. And I think the ways that you and I know best is, really closing our eyes, meditating, and tuning in with that feeling, and touching in with the soma, the body, and letting, and because that's our belief system, and this is our worldview. We believe that we can change, the world by shifting what's happening on a personal level. And that's a belief that I hold very strongly, and that's the worldview that I carry with me in everything that I do. And that's the work, that you do as well. It's like, how do we shift it on the personal? And if everyone does that, that's a different world.
We are recalibrating if we are all shifting. If this experience right now is requesting you to reflect deeply, then it's working. The shift is happening. If you are feeling called to really ask tough questions and rewire psychologically, emotionally, and physically how you respond to your surroundings, to people who are seemingly different, then I think the shift is working. The shift is working. This essentially is a moment in time that we're going to talk about with our grandchildren. The same way we talk about civil rights movement and other periods around the world in our historical time, we're going to look at and talk about this period in the same light. So we're simply going through a major shift, an initiation.
Initiation, for sure. We can spend, hours talking about this, but I'd like to end with one last question. And for sure, anyone who's viewing live right now, if there's any questions you'd like to throw into the mix, feel free. I wanted to ask you, what you feel like the one thing that you know for certain is. What is the one truth that you can impart to everyone who's tuning in right now? Out of everything that you know, out of everything that you don't know, what is the one thing that is certain in all of this?
That light will always pierce through darkness. That's the first one. And the second is nothing lasts forever. This is all impermanent. So to have the resilience to keep going and contribute toward the future we want for the next generation, I think we have that within ourselves to do.
Yeah, beautiful.
To do effectively.
Thank you so much for your insights, your wisdom, your time, and for spending your evening, my morning, connecting in this way. And to everyone watching, thank you so much. And if you want to follow Chocolako, this is not a name that you can forget. Chocolako, look for her on Instagram. She is all over social media. And she is the founder of Yoga Innergy, and she is, she coins it as the glow mat. I'm doing a reverse introduction. This is an outro. But she calls herself a glow mat, a global nomad, and she's a beautiful human being. We met in Bali, and we've stayed in touch. This was a few years ago. I would say 4 or 5 years ago. I would think now.
3 years ago, yeah. We met 3 years
or something like that. It's just, but I feel like I've connected to you on such a soul level, and we met in a cafe talking about the power of now, because that was the book that she was reading, and I just so appreciate your time and spending, especially times of crisis and turmoil, communicating and sharing with you on a meaningful level like this. So thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you, Johnson.